Hi, everybody. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Who would you like to FaceTime with?
Okay, so I see you can hear me. That's great. So we'll get started. Thanks for joining. For some reason, I can't see you folks, but that's because I'm a Luddite with this. So we'll get started here. I hope you all have the program with you, and I'm going to use that, and we'll get started. So on page 4, also there's one page missing in the PowerPoint presentation. So when we get there, we'll miss it. So we're going to go over a lot of stuff today. The first thing relates to entity formation. Then we're going to talk about legal issues and why it's important to acquire the rights properly. And then we'll get into the meat of the program. excuse me, production financing, and that's through equity and debt and maybe other opportunities. We're also going to talk about development funds and finishing funds. One would ordinarily talk about development funds before you talk about the financing because it comes in before then, but we can't because it just doesn't work that way in my presentation. And so then we're also going to talk about finishing funds. I'm going to go back and post the cash flow by using the actual slides because it's arithmetic, and I think it would be easier to do it with arithmetic, with the slide facing you. And then we'll go forward and we'll talk about some other stuff. Okay, so first things first, I know there's a lot of lawyers on this call, so forgive me if I'm going to go a little bit basic on that, because there's also a lot of people on this call who are not lawyers. First things first, we want to have an entity which actually produces a film. The reason we want an entity is for the reasons one forms an entity, which is to limit your personal liability and to have perpetual life for the entity, because that way it's easier to buy and sell. The limitation on liability is important. I had a client actually have someone get injured on a set and the insurance didn't cover. So it was interesting. So I see two people have raised their hands. I don't know actually how to respond to that. Oh, I got a lot of people. Okay. So everybody's saying they can hear me. That's great. So next, the question is what kind of entity to form? Some of you are from outside the US, so I'm just going to talk about US stuff, US law, US customs, things like that. So we want to have what's called a pass-through entity, such that the profits and losses and the tax benefits and tax losses will pass through the entity directly to the owners of the entity. In the US, there are three kinds of entities that can do that. It's a limited liability company, a corporation which is formed in the ordinary course, and then makes a separate election to the Internal Revenue Service to become a subchapter S corporation, or in the old days, a limited partnership. The limited partnership isn't used anymore, and the reason for that is because limited liability companies now have the ability to create intricate financing schemes which allow the investors to do exactly what they want to do in connection with the program. C corporations, however, are subject to income tax. So if a corporation makes $100,000 in profit, it has to pay tax on that. Thanks to President Trump, the rate is lower. So let's say it's 25%. So you'd pay $25,000 in taxes, and then you'd issue a dividend to the owners of the company of $75,000, and then they would pay tax on that same money. So in effect, the subchapter S corporation, limited liability, and limited partnership eliminates double taxation, and that's why we do that. Limited liability companies are generally thought to be the right way to go, and it allows everyone to achieve their goals with very flexible financing. Okay, page 7. Once you form the new entity, the entity has to acquire the rights. What frequently happens in these situations is that the writer, producer, or writer-director is one and the same people. And even in that case, the writer has to transfer his or her rights from himself or herself to the entity. It needs to be done on a piece of paper. Just because you are the principal owner of the company or the managing member of the LLC doesn't mean the LLC has the rights to your property unless you transfer it. And that transfer has to be in a form that a bond company, in fact, the Screen Actors Guild and other people will be satisfied with. That's all part of the chain of title. The managing member of the company is one who typically has responsibility for running the company. Frequently, that's the lead producer on a show. That's a lead producer is just a term that I use as being the person who is the lead producer. There are line producers, there are executive producers, there are co-producers, but typically there's one or two people who are responsible for making sure everything goes right. In an LLC, not only do you have the managing member, who is frequently the producer, but you also have limited liability members. And those people have limited liability. Their liability to the entity is limited to the amount they invest in the company. And that's the name for limited liability members. I'm throwing in the notion here of a completion bond. A completion bond will come up again later, but we like completion bonds because they guarantee to the investors or lenders, who usually insist on it, that a picture will be completed on time and on budget. And if the production starts to take too long or get too expensive, the bond company has authority to come in and take over in the worst case scenario, or otherwise push things along. Further, they also control the money, and that works pretty well too. So in a typical rights acquisition deal where I am the producer and I'm acquiring rights, we're on page 8, where we're acquiring rights from a third party, there's an option agreement that's entered into. Under an option agreement, I will buy the exclusive rights to a story for a period of time. And in that period of time, I will have the exclusive right to develop that story and turn it into a screenplay and a motion picture. No one else can do that. The owner will give me those rights. The price for the option is set out. There's some rules of thumb that might be interesting. If the ultimate purchase price for a property is, say, $100,000, one might pay $10,000 for the option price, or 10%. I've done deals that's significantly higher. I've even done deals where we give the buyer the rights to the property. And basically, by doing so, we take the property off the market and allow the buyer to develop it. Often there are negotiated terms in that agreement which relate to a profit participation, deferrals, if there is a sequel or a prequel made, if TV shows come, all of those things become relevant in determining whether or not a particular contract is fully negotiated like that. There's also, in an agreement like this, a typical time within which the company must commence production after they purchase the rights. So if you have an 18-month option and you exercise the rights and you pay the balance, in our example, of $90,000, so the seller has $100,000 in her pocket, there typically will be a period of time within which the producer must commence production, because otherwise the property will be simply off the market in perpetuity. And in theory, the seller wants to be in a position where she sees her project become something on an audiovisual basis. And so that's important. And it's also important, again, to make sure that during the option period, the producer has the right to develop that property, that written property, into a screenplay. The option could be with respect to a book. I just did one a couple months ago for a magazine article. It could be someone's life story rights, but the whole discussion of life story rights is beyond what we're talking about today. But having the rights exclusively is really important to how this is going to go. If you have an idea for a script and you commission someone to write that script from scratch, you're going to engage them to write that script as a work made for hire. And you, as the producer, will own the rights in the script from the moment of creation. That needs to be done in advance. Foreign countries may not have the same work for hire concept that the US does. The US law will frequently apply to discussions held with others. And so that's kind of really important. The overall idea of a work for hire is essential to every part of the motion picture production process. I mentioned before that chain of title is very important. If you buy rights to one book and you produce a script based on that book and a motion picture based on that script, you have a clean chain of title. There are but two links: book to script, script to movie. That's fine. But sometimes there are multiple pieces that form the foundation for your property, and you need all those links to get into the screenplay, which then becomes the movie. If you miss one and you don't have that claim, those rights, and a claim comes from a third party to that effect, you may seriously end up with an inability to move forward. I have 2 films right now that are talking about production later in the year. Both of them have claims from a writer. Both of them have hired lawyers. We cannot secure E&O insurance, errors and omissions insurance, for those claims at this time. So we're going to have to try to find a solution to that. Once you have the script, in order to raise the money, you'll find it's extremely difficult to raise the money just on the script. Then you get into what's called packaging, where you add a director, you add an actor or both, or actors, and you try to then go out and sell the picture with those elements attached. Those elements are really what the movie-going public or TV-watching public wants to know about. They don't go to a movie based upon someone writing it in most cases, or someone directing it in most cases. Having the actor is critical. But if you don't have a director to attract the actors, you're not going to be in a position to package the picture. So that's important. Right now, the agencies and the Writers Guild are in a gigantic litigation over the very packaging issue. That relates to the Writers Guild position that the agencies, because they are also becoming owners of property, are breaching their fiduciary duty to the writers as agents in order to package the property and take the other side of the table. It appears they're moving towards a resolution. The big 4 are still out, but this is a problem that's ongoing. Okay, so now we're on slide 10, financing production, an overview of equity and debt. In the film financing business, you don't have the problem that you have on Shark Tank. You don't come into the tank and talk to your investors and say, my picture is worth $50 million. You can give me a share of that and own a piece of it. Instead, the entire notion of equity on a film financing is based on cash flow. You don't have to value the picture. The value of the picture is determined when the picture actually sells and money comes in. So the investor will get a share of return and a share of profits based on cash flow. Those of you who may not have the slide, you can go to the email to which I invited you, and there is a download for which you can get from Google Drive, the second email which invited you all back. The second way to finance that's critical is debt. Most lenders, like a mortgage lender or even a lender in a film financing situation, wants to have collateral for the loan. They want to make sure there's something that they can take if the loan doesn't get repaid. So here they are, and typically they're secured by tax credits or rebates from the local jurisdiction. They're secured by foreign pre-sales or a minimum guarantee or what's called gap financing. In order to receive those, there is frequently a sales agency involved. These transactions are really complicated. There's lots of layers to them. And if you are going to borrow money against money against foreign pre-sales or minimum guarantees or a gap financing, it is highly likely that you're going to need a completion bond. While tax incentives sometimes are concerned with the delivery of a picture, most of the time they are, you don't have a time limit within which you have to deliver the picture in order to get the financing. So sometimes a bond isn't necessary on tax incentives financing. And further, if the incentive financing is not by a bank, a private lender may just have faith in the producer and accept their word that in fact this is going to go forward. The last kind of financing is unsecured, where a lender believes in the property and says, here's X dollars, pay me back at this date, and I believe you that you're going to pay me back, so I don't need any security. It's unusual, but it does happen. So in terms of raising the money itself, slide 11. The sale of securities is highly regulated. It includes state and federal regulations here. It is effectively the same marketplace as an initial public offering or a private placement, and it is highly, highly regulated. The long disclosure forms you see if you were to buy stock in a public offering are often required in these situations, but it is possible if you limit your proposed investors to accredited investors that you need not put together a very long private placement memorandum. The way I describe private placement memorandums or even prospectuses for an IPO is 30 to 60 pages that says don't invest. And the reason that is because you lay out all the things that can go wrong. You lay out the plan, but at the same time, you also lay out how that plan is not going to come to fruition. And if you have accredited investors, the obligation for disclosure shifts. Under US law, if you are not an accredited investor, the issuer or your LLC has to tell the buyer that he's got all these risks and in fact, he's going to lose all his money. But if you are an accredited investor, the obligation to secure that information falls on the investor's shoulders. So what we do typically is we prepare an operating agreement for the LLC. We prepare a subscription agreement, which includes an investor questionnaire, whereby the investor confirms, in fact, that he or she or it is an accredited investor. What that means is that the investor has a net worth of over $1 million, excluding his or her house, or has an income, I think, of over $300,000 a year for the last few years. And that means that they are deemed to be able to select their own, to uncover their own information and make the decision. By doing it that way, you don't have to buy an expensive private placement memorandum from an expensive lawyer like me or some of my other colleagues on here. Of course, crowdfunding is available. Indiegogo is a favorite for film companies. Their plan is such that you can actually give equity. If you don't give equity and you just get contributions, frequently the perk for such contributions may be a DVD or a credit at the end of the picture or something like that. And that's all legitimate and fine and dandy. Many people come around and say, oh, I have this fabulous business plan. I really want to circulate that to my potential investors. My personal opinion is that's a bad idea because I've never seen a business plan that did not include projections and comparables from prior films. No film can be no new film can be compared to any other film because there are significant differences. Just because, I'm going to date myself, Eating Raoul here did millions and millions of dollars in revenue, or the Blair Witch Project did millions and millions of dollars in revenue, even though it was a very low budget picture, has nothing to do with your picture. And in fact, what you're going to do likely is put the successful pictures in your private placement memorandum and omit the failures. And that in itself may be considered misleading. Further, in my opinion, having people who are investors who are not accredited and who find the $5,000 or $10,000 investment that they invested in your project very dear to them will make your life miserable. They will call you frequently and ask you what's happening to the money. How come you haven't delivered the picture? When am I going to see it in the theaters? When am I going to see it on TV? And the money is quite dear to them. It's important that you understand and your investors understand that over 80% of all movies don't make their money back. People should be investing in this because they want to, not because they see it as a ticket to success. They should invest in you, the producer, or the idea. One more thing, which is not on the slide there. It is very common in the entertainment industry to engage someone who says, oh, I can find you all the money you need. You got $5 million you need for your picture. I'll get you that money, no problem. Just pay me 3% of what I bring in. And you go about your business and you sign a contract with that guy that says he's going to bring in $5 million, he's going to get 3%. And that contract, while it may be enforceable, if the picture doesn't make its money back, your finder was actually acting as a broker-dealer without a license. What that means is that the investor has a claim against the broker-dealer and the film for 100% of their investment because the investment is tainted. So using finders in the motion picture business is common. With an agreement, whether oral or written, it is a disaster waiting to happen. You can say to somebody, trust me, I may pay you later what we think is fair if you raise money for me, but you cannot have an agreement in oral or in writing. It is unlawful, and it subjects everybody to a very high risk position. Slide 12, financing production, equity investment terms. I used to teach a class at the New York Film Academy for 2 or 3 years. It was a multi-week class. And when I told one of my classes this, all of them were shocked that there was a plan by which the investors would get back their money. They thought it was effectively a gift. So let's assume your picture costs $1 million. You have 10 people who put $100,000 in, and they make up the $1 million. Then you go out and you sell the movie to someone for $2 million. Your equity investors will get back their $1 million first before anybody else. They will typically get a priority return of anywhere between 10 and 60%. I personally have seen deals of 10%, and I have a client who made a deal recently where the investors get a 60% priority return. So in other words, in my example, the 60% guy would get, the investors would get $1.6 million of the $2 million that came in, divided among them equally. Or if it's a standard deal, they would get $1.2 million divided among them equally. That's true whether the picture gets financed in 2015 and the money comes in 2025. The 20% or 30% or 60% is a fixed number. It's not interest. If it's interest, the number keeps growing every year. So my advice to producers is to not agree to interest, but rather agree to a fixed rate. 20% is the most common one I've seen. The balance of that money then goes, gets split. In our example of $1,200,000, the $800,000 now gets split 50% to the equity investors, also pro rata, so each one will get another $40,000. And the other 50% goes to the producer. And then the producer has to pay all the other net profit participants out of his 50% share. So if the producers as a group get 10% and the director gets 10%, that's going to reduce what the producer himself retains or herself retains. The share of net profit participation is based on the size of the investment as compared to the total investment that was made. So now we're going to talk about debt financing. Boy, I'm getting right on time here. This is good. So slide 13. As I mentioned before, the common collateral are tax credits and rebates, foreign pre-sales, gap financing, and minimum guarantees. So let's talk about foreign pre-sales. If you have a picture with some name talent in it, it's quite likely that you will be able to find a foreign sales agent who will agree to sell the picture in territories outside the US. And that sales agent will take a sales commission of anywhere between 5 and 25% of what they sell. So if the sales, in our picture that cost $1 million, there's a sale in Germany for $100,000 to a distributor, that distributor is likely to take a commission off that, off the $100,000 of anywhere between 5 and 25%. In our example, because this is a relatively low budget picture, you're going to find the commissions are higher. So let's say they take 20%. So now there's 80% left that's available to you. And then you're going to pledge that deal as collateral to the lender. So the lender is now going to take a look at the credit worthiness of the buyer. So now you get an understanding of how complicated this gets. And if the buyer is not creditworthy in the lender's opinion, and the lender can decide that on any basis that he or she wants, they won't accept it as collateral. So that could increase or decrease the size of the collateral pool that you have. Further, sometimes, and I had this on a picture, a notice of assignment, which is typically required, whereby the buyer assigns the obligation, agrees to allow the assignment of an obligation to pay to the, instead of to you, to the lender. Sometimes the buyer won't do that. And so you'd have to find another basis on which to secure that collateral. I had that on a picture. It was a monumental pain in the neck. But all these things are what makes the deal complicated. Further, just like the mortgage on your house, if you're going to buy $1 million house, you're going to put somewhere around $200,000 down. The reason for that is the bank won't lend you 100% of the value of the house. They want to make sure you have some skin in the game. So here in our example, you have a $100,000 foreign sales deal. You have a 20% sales commission. And the bank is going to look at that and say, oh, well, we can only lend on 80% of that in any event. And besides which, Mr. Sales Agent, I'm not going to let you take your full commission until my loan is repaid. So you can only take a 5% commission now. You'll take your other 15% later. So this financing gets extremely complicated. In the tax rebate situation, it's a little less complicated. The rebate is typically assigned directly to the investor or the lender, I'm sorry. So if such and such a state is going to write you a check for $500,000, that obligation can be assigned directly to a lender. But the lender, again, is not going to lend $500,000 against that rebate. They're going to lend less, and they're going to take fees, and they might take their interest up front. So all of these are means by which the amount of money you as a producer get may be collateralized by a loan, but it's not, the amount you get is not going to be equal, not collateralized by a loan, collateralized by a contract, but the amount you as the producer get is going to be significantly less than the amount of the contract. So yeah, we're talking about that on page 14. The lender will not lend 100% of the value of the contract. Like I said just now, they may take interest upfront and reduce the total amount of the loan. They always evaluate the creditworthiness of the collateral, and some distributor commitments do not support a loan. If the financing is done, if there are a lot of people entitled to participate in the revenue from a motion picture, such as net profit participants, lenders, equity players, and others, and in fact, even the guilds for their residuals, a collection agency manager is frequently appointed by the producer. The producer engages this company to act as a fiduciary for the producer. That collection agency management company, typically Vintage or Freeway, will take a 1 to 3% commission on the gross revenue of the picture and will pay out the money that is received in accordance with a schedule. So that schedule will actually reflect the waterfall that's been agreed upon by the investors and the lenders and everybody else, so that all of the money that comes in gets paid out in accordance with a pre-existing schedule, and everybody understands where the money goes. However, most people don't factor in the 1 to 3% fee. So again, that reduces the amount of money you have available for yourself. We talked about the last bullet on page 14, where the sales agency may be required to defer their commissions in order for the lender to get paid back more quickly. So in modifying, on page 15, in monetizing tax rebates, you have to consider when the state or other municipality can actually pay that loan back, pay that rebate. New York, for example, can take up to 3 years to make the rebate available to you. Most loans I see require repayment in somewhere between 12 and 24 months. It's not going to work with New York. So you have to find another solution. If in fact the payment is going to be 3 years out, you have to find a way around that. In New York, for example, one can secure pre-certification of the estimated amount of tax benefit you'll receive. So that is the amount on which the lender is likely to lend. You don't get a certification if you shoot in Georgia. So third parties come in and they determine what the amount of that loan will be based on their experience with the with the state of Georgia. Again, the value of that rebate is discounted for the risk and time. There was a time when Iowa had a big scandal around its tax credits, and one particular lender I'm aware of had a loan outstanding and will no longer lend in the state of Iowa. So that is a problem you need to address. And the payment is only triggered, and then the waiting period for payment starts only when the picture is completed and the final application is filed. So if your estimated tax rebate is X and you come in and your final analysis is 98% of X, well, you're only going to get 98% of X. But if it's 104% of X, you'll get 104, assuming it all goes through properly. In New York, for example, there's a handful of accounting firms that are allowed to actually certify that on behalf of the state, and they can make their own determinations. Excuse me. Tax credits is a whole other story. If I am shooting a film in a state which provides a credit, that credit goes to the benefit of the film company. And it is a credit against income tax that's due. Since the film company will likely not pay any income tax in that state, the credit, in theory, is worthless to the entity itself. If you don't have any income in the state and you don't pay tax in the state, if you have a credit, the credit doesn't do you any good. So what happens is there is a whole secondary market that has developed for these tax credits. And there are brokers and lenders and lots of people who will barter those credits. And so what happens is in Georgia, for example, if you have $1 million credit that's due to you and you're not going to pay any tax, you can sell that credit to another company because the state acknowledges that could happen. So the credit, if the credit is $1 million, Coca-Cola isn't going to pay $1 million for that credit because they could just pay the $1 million in tax. So what they'll do is they'll pay a discount on that. Maybe they'll pay 85 cents on the dollar, maybe they'll pay 90, maybe they'll pay 80, but they'll only pay that. Then your loan that you're going to secure against that credit is going to be based on the amount of the sale price of the credit, not the credit itself. So if the credit's worth $1 million and the purchase price is $850,000, the loan is based on a sale price of $850,000, and that in turn has to have a little wiggle room in it as well. So you may get a loan only for 85% of $850,000. I can't do the arithmetic in my head. And then you also will have an interest deduction on it. So while people can say they can get, 50% tax credit and tax benefits or 30% tax benefits on a picture, it doesn't mean they're actually going to secure 30% of that money. They're going to secure a lot less than that with all of the transaction costs that come around. Ultimately, the loan that you get against that is secured by the proceeds from that sale. Okay. What happens if you have both equity and debt in your picture? Suppose you have 100% equity. You have a $10 million picture, $10 million gets raised from 5 people, $2 million each. It's very clear what happens. The money goes in the pot, it gets spent, the bond company insures the delivery, the picture's delivered, the money comes in, it gets divided, the collection agency manager knows how to deliver it. It's very simple. And the equity will get 50% of the net profits. If there's one investor, he'll get all 50%. If there's 5 investors and they're equal, they'll each get 10%. So it becomes fairly straightforward that way. But if you have a picture that has 50% in equity and it has a 30% loan against sales and 20% against tax credits and rebates, I raised the question as to whether the equity should still get 50% of the net profits. The question is raised because they're no longer financing 100% of the picture. I don't know. It's something you have to talk about with your investors and decide if it's appropriate. The argument for reducing the equity investors' share is that they are at significantly less risk. And their response to that is, yes, of course we're at significantly less risk. That's why we're only putting up 50% of the money. But by doing all those pre-sales and gap and minimum guarantee deals before the picture is finished, you as the producer have cut out our upside. So why would we agree to reduce our back end if you've reduced our upside? So that's a discussion that happens with your equity investors before you get to the point where you sign the papers. I have, in the recent period of time, I haven't seen a picture where the tax credits and rebates were not a material driver of where the picture is shot. There are 37 states in New York who have, in the US who have this. There are credits available all over the world. A particularly important part of that is the value of those credits and whether the picture can be shot in a jurisdiction that allows favorable tax credits. Bear in mind that the tax rebates and credits are repaid to the lender not based on the success of the picture. It's simply repaid based on the fact that the picture has been completed and certain expenditures have been spent within the jurisdiction in accordance with those rules. So it doesn't matter whether the picture is successful. If the picture is completed and you file the papers properly, the money comes back to you. Okay, so we're finished with that. Slide 17. Today, there are 37 states that have incentives, as I said, many foreign countries do. The ability to turn these into credits is not simple or easy. And I'm going to talk a bit about New York because I live here and it is a very popular state for shooting film. So New York is unusual. It is what we call a refundable tax credit state, which is neither a rebate nor a credit. It's sort of in between. New York will pre-certify the amount, and you can borrow against the certified amount. The challenge in New York is when you use a pass-through entity. So New York took the position when they adopted these credits that they weren't going to subsidize Tom Cruise's $20 million fee above the line. They were only going to subsidize those expenses that occurred below the line. Those of you who don't know what the line is, it's when there's a budget and there's a line drawn in it, and above the line you have the writer's fees or the rights fees, you have the director, you have the principal cast, and you have the producers and all of their costs attendant to that. Below the line, because there's really a line in the budget, is everybody else. That's the crew, the extras, the film stock, all of that has to go below the line. Insurance costs, the completion bond, all of that is below the line. So New York allows certain of those expenses to be applied for and applied against the credit. And on those expenses recently, just as of April 1st, the credit has been reduced from 30% to 25%. In New York City, you must spend at least $1 million now to secure that credit. So your ultra low budget pictures under the Screen Actors Guild deals, or your low budget, modified low budget pictures under the Screen Actors Guild will not qualify for New York State tax incentive credits if they are shot within New York City. If you go outside the New York metropolitan areas, the 5 boroughs, Westchester, Rockland, Nassau, and Suffolk, you can secure a higher credit An additional 10% is available on the labor costs outside there. I know of several pictures that are being shot in Buffalo because there is ample crew there. The cost of moving the crew there, of creating a crew there, does not include travel. And they have lots and lots of historical places to shoot. So the challenge with New York is that because New York has a pass-through entity, New York says to the LLC, let me look and see who your investors are. And if your investors owe us any money, we got to collect that first. So imagine you have a $500,000 tax rebate coming to you from New York. And imagine one of your very wealthy investors has $1 million liability to the state of New York for taxes, and he's in a bona fide dispute with him. The $500,000 tax rebate, and he's only one of 5 investors, the $500,000 tax rebate that would go to the LLC is set off by the state of New York to satisfy his obligation. In doing that, each of the other investors suffers because they can't have the benefit of the tax credit. So we've come up, as lawyers have come up with this system, and most banks will only lend on this basis, where the LLC forms a wholly owned subsidiary, which is a C corporation. Remember, we talked about that before, and that company actually pays taxes. And that C corporation is the entity which actually produces the picture. It signs all the contracts with everybody. And because it spends the money, it gets the rebate. But there's a contract between the LLC and the subsidiary, whereby the subsidiary says, I'll produce the picture for you if you give me the money. And when I'm done, I'll deliver the copyright and the picture to you, and I'll deliver the rebate to you that I get as well. And then that can go out to the LLC investors. So that's how it works. It's complicated. There's extra paperwork involved, but if you want to secure your lender to obtain the benefit of the New York tax credit, that's the only way you can do it. Slide 19, we're talking about completion bonds. This is a lot of first-time producers are nervous about completion bonds because they fear them, because the bond company can take over the picture and fire the director. But you really have to, excuse me, fuck it up a lot in order for the director to come up and to get fired. The bond company guarantees to its beneficiaries, which are frequently the lenders or the investors or both, that the picture will be delivered on time and on budget. Very often, a substantial contingency fund is required to be left in the budget. So if you have a $10 million picture, you can bet that somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million is going to be set aside as a contingency in case things go wrong, and there's enough money available to finish the picture without the bond company spending its money. The last thing the bond company wants to do is spend its money to finish the picture. The fee ranges, used to be 6% with a 3% rebate, and then it became something like 2 or 3% depending on who it is. And that's how it goes. The bond company puts its hand in your production in a way which you could find offensive, but if you accept them as having the ability to assist you, it will be helpful. They approve the key production personnel, they approve the post-production supervisor, they approve the line producer, they approve all kinds of people who are involved in it, and ultimately they also control the cash flow. You will have a cash flow schedule developed which will say on week 1 through 3, I need this much money. On week 4, I need this much. On week 5, I need that much. And they will issue that money to you and make sure that you don't spend them on anything other than that which you are supposed to spend. Their rights include taking over the film and replacing the personnel, but you don't ever want to have them do it. Okay, now a quick detour to development and finishing funds. Every picture is involved with development financing. Development financing is the money used to develop the picture. You acquire the rights, you hire a screenwriter, you might hire a director with whom you're going to work with the screenwriter and the producer to develop the screenplay in a fashion that makes sense. It is always necessary. It is frequently taken in as convertible debt, and there is a higher risk and a higher reward. We kind of give them 2 for 1. So if I have $1 million picture and I need $100,000 to develop the picture, I ask my development investor to give me $100,000. I say to the development investor, you can leave your money in, and when we go into production, you'll have your share of the picture as if you were an investor. So if that would give you, say, 5% of the net profits on the picture, I, the producer, will give you another 5% out of my side of the picture, because you're putting your money up early and you're taking the highest degree of risk. Frequently, those 2 for 1 deals are what's done, with the producer matching out of his own pocket or her own pocket what the investment is, what the profit participation might be. Also, that investor may have the right to get his money out when the rest of the financing comes in with a return. All of that is negotiable. It's important to do that up front. You will need development funds to get your picture off the ground. You will need someone to support you. Those go forward on this basis. Finishing funds are a real problem. If you have a picture that's budgeted at $1 million and you decide to go forward and shoot because you have enough money to finish shooting and you have $600,000 and you don't have the last $400,000, you are setting yourself up for a very, very difficult deal. And the lender the picture that isn't finished has absolutely no value. If you still need $400,000 to finish the picture, that investor who puts up that $400,000 will take you to the cleaners, and rightly so. Don't start a picture unless you know you have all the money. Those deals typically are last in, first out. That investor will get their money back. They will take a significant return, frequently higher than the 20% that a typical equity investor will get, and they will take a disproportionate share of the net profits, because without them, the picture is worthless. So don't put yourself in the situation of needing finishing funds. Make sure you have all the money. If you don't have a bond, that's okay. Bonding companies aren't really interested in getting involved in really low budget pictures. So make sure you have it all, because if you don't, you're going to end up making a terrible deal to finish the picture. Okay, now we're going to talk about distribution and cash flow. Before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about talent deals and net profit. These are typical terms that one would find in a talent deal. There's always fixed compensation, the minimum for which is often fixed by the guild, Directors Guild, Writers Guild, or SAG-AFTRA. And then there's contingent compensation, which is where everything gets very interesting. There's nothing wrong with you agreeing to pay someone more than the guild minimum for fixed compensation, and the guilds are happy to do it. There is pension and welfare, or health and welfare, that's paid on top of that to the guilds, which are subject to a cap. If you pay someone $1 million in salary as an actor, you don't have to pay 20% of the $1 million to SAG-AFTRA on the P&W. There is a cap on that, but you still have to pay it. The contingent compensation is important. You may frequently, or lately, I've done a few deals for directors where the producer says, okay, you're going to get a very large fee for directing the picture, and I know that's less than your normal fee, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to incentivize you to make sure you deliver the picture on time and on budget. And if you do, and I don't invade the contingency fund, I'll give you a piece of that contingency fund as part of your payment. So that's a deferral. In a way, it's a semi-secured deferral because the money's already in the budget. There are other deferrals that come in as a cost of production. On the first money that comes in, you can pay a deferral to that investor, or you could pay a deferral after the investors recoup their 100% or their 120%. But all of that has to be discussed with the investors, and it has to be clear up front. There are terms of adjusted gross. Nobody gets $1 gross anymore. Adjusted gross, net profit. You can take a share of the producer's net profit. All of these things, meaning deferrals and adjusted gross, will reduce the size of the net profit pool. That's a big deal, because if $1 million comes in and there's a $100,000 deferral that has to get paid, and then you reach net profits, well, there's only $900,000 left. So it becomes important for you as the producer to make sure that whatever you do not reduce the net profit pool available, because ultimately that's what you're going to get as a producer, and it's also going to be what you pay to your colleagues who helped you get the thing off the ground. Now, if you bear with me, I'm going to share this slide, which is number 24. I hope I can do it. Nope. Did that already. I'm sorry, bear with me. I'm getting there. Okay, here it is. So we have a theatrical distribution waterfall where the box office collects $10 million. The standard deal is that the theater, the local AMC movie theater, will remit 90% of the revenue after certain specified costs. That's why your popcorn is $5, because those costs are not included. In general, the distributor will receive around 50% of that box office revenue. So if you see ads in the trades that say a picture's grossed $100 million at the box office, half of that has gone back to the distributor in round numbers. So upon receipt of that money, the distributor then takes its distribution fee of between 15 and 35%. Let's assume for our purposes that the fee is 25%. 25% of $5 million is $1,250,000. So the distributor now takes a fee of $1,250,000, and he's going to recoup his marketing or P&A, prints and advertising costs. Interest on those costs may also be recouped, but let's assume there are costs of $2.5 million to generate the $10 million. So now the LLC will receive what's left. So from the $10 million at the box office, they're going to get 12.5%, or $1,250,000. So now the production company has received $1,250,000. From that, if we assume an $800,000 production cost and it's all equity, the investors will receive 120% of that, or $960,000. That leaves a balance of $290,000. And that is split half to the investors and half to the producers. The investors divide the $145,000 according to the size of their investment relative to the total investment. So that's part one. So we've divided up the proceeds that came to the investor. Now, from the producer's side, they've only received $145,000 of net profit. They then have to pay a director, the actors, writers, a composer, line producer, the lawyer, and other people a share of the net profits. So in this example, I have laid out a 7.5% net profit participation to the director, a combined total of 10% among the actors, 5% to the writers, 5% to the composer, the line producer, the lawyer, other people involved, and the producer will retain that much. So for the $10 million received in the box office, a producer who retains 22.5% of the net profits of the picture will receive $65,000. That's not a bad payday, but look at how long it takes to get through that. And bear in mind that the rule of thumb that I like to give to my producing clients is that if you end up between 20 and 35% of the net profits of your picture, you've done a pretty good job. So that's what I'm saying. There's a question here. Do lawyers typically get a percentage of producers' net profit? I see it a lot. I know I always ask for it. It's not uncommon. I can tell you I've gotten it on many pictures, but it's never amounted to $1. So it's important to understand that. I've never seen it higher than 5%. It's often 1 to 3%. Okay. There seems to be other questions here. I'm sorry. I don't know what the cap is. Someone's asking about the cap. So I don't know the answer. Okay, because I don't understand the question. Okay, so we talked about the collection agency manager, and I'm going to stop sharing the slide at this point. Hi, everybody. Okay. If you understand that waterfall, you'll understand why it's important that you actually be clear about where it is in your waterfall that you pay your profit participants. Gross proceeds affects everybody. Adjusted gross proceeds will not affect the distributor. Net will only affect those people who have a piece of the net. So we talked about a collection agency manager collecting all revenue from distribution and paying 1 to 3%. Often these customary off-the-top expenses, as they're called, include SAG and DGA and WGA residuals. Those amount to sometimes as high as 20% of the foreign income. This goes to the issue I just mentioned with regard to where these investments are to be paid. You have to be clear about it. You have to understand it. Your profit participant has to understand it, and your investors have to understand it as well. Okay, so that's basically the end of the presentation. 1 hour. Wow. Okay, so key points to take away here. The LLC is the preferred entity form. It is essential that you have clean chain of title. You must consider the best location for your maximum tax incentive for both production and post-production. For New York, for example, there is a post-production credit. Even if you shoot in New Jersey and you come to New York for post-production, you can actually receive a post-production credit. There are differences in New York for what qualifies for post-production and production credits. For example, if you seek a production credit in New York for the whole production of the picture, you will not be eligible to receive a rebate or a credit toward your music expenses. However, if you shoot elsewhere and come to New York and do your music in New York, your music is eligible for post-production credit. So you have to be careful. The phrase we use is that the credit applies to qualifying below the line expenses. If your expense doesn't qualify, you don't get a credit. Your investor's deal is typically 50% of net. Financing with debt may increase the producer's equity share. It also may not. And I would advise you to embrace the the completion bond company. I would also suggest to you that basing all of your profit participation on net profit will do you well. You won't have reductions on your net profit share, and things will go very well. So I'm starting to get a bunch of questions. Let me see what they are. So, wow. How to find the investors? I don't know. It's a great question. I knew I was going to get it. I would say to you that the short answer is to talk to the people you know and ask them if they're willing to invest. Expect them to say no. But when they say no, ask them if they know anybody who might. Because there is no place to go with a list. where there's a list of investors. People who have invested in the past may not want to invest again in the future, so that's not an indication that they're good sources. But remember, bear in mind that any kind of presentation you make to these people that says, I guarantee that I'm going to give you this much money is baloney. And if those people are sophisticated, they know it already. They know that they are likely to lose their money. You don't have to tell them that. They already know it. But what you have to do is say you're going to husband that money well. You're going to do your best to deliver that picture on time and on budget, and you're going to sell the hell out of it. That's what they're interested in. You don't have to tell them what you now know, that 80% of all pictures don't recoup their investment, but you are going to do your best to actually recover it. So let's see. So there's that. There's a question with regard to the slides. If anybody hasn't been able to get it, I will, I thought it was downloadable. If it's not, I will be happy to send it directly to you. If you have more questions, please put them in the Q&A part. And if you want, we can talk about what the future holds. When the curve is flattened and things get back to normal, production will start. I can tell you that there are union guilds. All of the guilds are getting together with the studios to figure out how to open up production. There are individuals who are attempting to suggest ways that this can happen. I know of one picture that's planning to start pre-production with insurance in Puerto Rico in the fall and start production in January. I have a client who wants to start production on his picture in July in Thailand because the incidence of COVID-19 there is very low. There are lots and lots of other precautions that people are going to take with regard to this. So no one knows what the future holds, but certainly there's going to have to be a lot of changes. People are going to need to conduct testing, make sure that there's proper distancing. I don't know how you're going to do crowd scenes. I don't know how you're going to do love scenes. I think it's going to be challenging. Right now, I don't think it's possible to insure against the COVID-19 risk. I think all of those claims will be accepted by the insurance policy. And of course, the COVID-19 risk is severe. If your lead or your director or both leads get COVID-19 and are unable to participate, your picture effectively has to shut down. So no bond company is going to want to bond that picture until the protocols are in place. My client who wants to shoot in Thailand has said he's thinking of quarantining everybody for 2 weeks when they arrive. But then the challenge is if the quarantine doesn't work, you still have to postpone the picture until the virus on that person runs its course. So there are very, very serious challenges on that. Further, with the recent spat between AMC Theaters and Universal Pictures, who released Trolls with direct to the online and did very well with it, AMC has said they're not going to show any Universal movies anymore. I don't believe that it'll be any more. I'm sure there'll be some sort of negotiation, but the landscape is changing. Being able to say to someone that you're going to make your money in theatrical distribution is not going to be as easy as it used to be. In response to the AMC position, Comcast, Universal has said that that theatrical is still a vital part of their distribution. So let me see what these questions are. Hold on. When we negotiate high caliber talent, what kind of back end would you recommend we offer? Adjusted gross or net? Okay, I would always recommend net. I would not recommend adjusted gross. If some people are in a position because they've gotten it before, they might be in a position to demand it again. If you can control it and not work with them, I would try to do that. In New York, I don't know, there's a question as to what the minimum is to be eligible for post-production credit. I assume that's in New York. I don't know the answer to that. I think it might be the $1 million, but I just don't know. It's not hard to find that. For a non-broker, is there a legal way to introduce financing to producer without putting the picture at risk? Well, I don't want to give out legal advice on that because it's very complicated. The short answer is I think so. The longer answer is you'll need to talk to the lawyer for both your own lawyer and the lawyer for the production company. There's a question, can you see the presentation again? Yes, I'm happy to email it to anyone who sends me an email at markjacobson.com. I'll send it to you as an attachment. The federal incentives, okay. Federal incentives and EB-5 and opportunity zones are out of my ken. Section 181 was an incentive that was in place for a long time. In my experience, it was not used effectively because it typically only applied to those investors who had real estate income, and then only to the extent that that real estate income was more than the amount of the investment. And then even if, so in other words, if an investor had $1 million of rental income from real estate and they invested $500,000 in a movie, and that $500,000 was spent in the same year that the individual received $1 million, then he would be able to deduct off his income tax return for that year $500,000. That doesn't really do much because it simply defers the payment of taxes. It's not really a terrific benefit, and it wasn't as significant as people thought in the beginning. I have been personally, I've been trying to work with EB-5 investors on this. The challenge with EB-5s are, as I understand it, there is an obligation to have jobs for a period of years. Films usually stop fairly quickly, so I'm not sure how EB-5 works. And opportunity zones are in effect, for example, in New York, you could consider the area outside the New York metropolitan area as an opportunity zone because the tax credit in New York is higher than it would be in New York. How to attach actors pre-financing? Well, one thing I can say is if you have an existing relationship with an actor, use it, talk to him. However, when you say you have an actor attached, it's always going to be subject to signing a contract and subject to their availability. So it becomes very, very difficult to attach anyone. You can attach a director to a picture with a deal that pays them something during the development period to work with the screenwriter, and one does not need to sign up with the DGA in order to do that. You can pay them a relatively small piece of their overall compensation. You can limit their involvement for a period of time. And then once the picture is done and ready to go, or the script is done and ready to go, then the director, with his or her reputation, will go out and try to attach a cast. Okay. For a non-broker, nope, okay. What is the typical development budget for a picture budgeted under $3 million? Well, it's hard to say. There are rules of thumb that apply, but they're only rules of thumb, which really means that they can be changed simply because it makes sense to do it. So the overall budget for a picture, the rights component for a picture budgeted at $3 million should not exceed, in round numbers, as a rule of thumb, $150,000. That would include life story rights, that would include book rights, magazine rights, screenplay rights, anything else relating to the script should be no more than 5%. Lower than that is better, but that's where it should be. The development budget is whatever you think it costs to get the script in shape, to attach a director and a cast, and to scout locations. If your picture has 23 locations, you're going to need a lot larger budget than one that has 2 locations because you have to scout the locations. All of that is part of the development budget. How do you get around the studios networks not wanting to contract with an LLC? I'm not familiar with that. Have never experienced that. How can a producer guarantee adjusted gross since they are not the distributor? Do they assign that obligation to the distributor, and could it disincentivize acquisition? Well, it depends on what you mean. An adjusted gross participant will participate in money that comes in very early on before any recoupment on the production cost. And that's an obligation you can shift to the distributor to pay, but it's only going to get paid, you can rest assured, after the distributor takes his fee and his print and advertising money. So those things are that it's not necessarily a means by which it would disincentivize acquisition, because you're not going to commit to, unless you commit to take money out of the distributor's pocket, it's not going to matter. Okay, some more. Can a tax credit be calculated on the basis of an accrual for the expense? I believe the answer to that is no. The reason is because the tax credit is designed for your company to spend money within the state, to attract jobs, to attract revenue, all of those things. So it can't be on an accrual basis. It has to be what you actually spent. That's what the accountants, in particular in New York, certify to the state, that in fact you have spent that money. And if they can certify that, then the state says, okay, you'll get 25% of that number. When the New York credit was 30%, we used a rough estimate of about 18% of the total budget of a picture to be eligible for as part of the budget of the picture. Now that the credit is only 25%, you're really looking at around 15% of the overall cost of the picture. Okay, for a first-time director, what's the lowest budget film a first-time director gets a chance? Well, I suppose you could do a film for nothing. You get your friends to act and you shoot it on an iPhone. It's not impossible. All of that can happen. I've seen pictures. I was involved with a picture many, many years ago where a guy bought the props on a credit card and made everybody tuck the tags in, and he shot the picture and he returned all the props. So I'm not recommending that, but the budget of a picture can be as low as you can possibly make it. The question is whether the picture has the quality to be seen and to be distributed. That's important. The question is, if you shoot in Rockland, the percentage of tax credit would be 40% versus 30% in New York. Well, that's almost right. If you shoot in Rockland, I believe it's still only 25% in Rockland, but if you go outside Rockland or where there is a better incentive, the 25% still applies, but there is an additional 10% only that applies to labor expenses, so that you would get a 35% credit in those areas. Where a producer gains P&A financing, aside from the distributor's participation, and what priority does the producer pay off the P&A financier? That's an interesting question. I have a client right now who is raising P&A money as part of the financing money. The reason he does that is because typically a P&A investor will get paid first before the equity investors in the picture get paid. But if you pay the P&A investor at the same time as you pay the equity investors, there's a faster cash flow to the equity investors. They don't have to wait for the P&A investors. So the P&A investor gets a smaller slug of the revenue because it's matched up with the equity, but he gets the money faster. Similarly, the equity investor gets a smaller slug of the revenue, but gets his money faster. If you bring P&A to the party, my suggestion is that you actually use that P&A with the distributor, and such that the distributor matches you dollar for dollar with your P&A. That way the distributor isn't going to try to get their money back first. It's actually going to work together with you and every time they get a dollar, you get a dollar, and vice versa. I think that's all. If there are any other questions, I think Q&A is an easier place to go for that. For me anyway, please use the Q&A. I don't see any other questions. Oh, one new one. Okay, so seriously, if anybody wants to secure another copy of the presentation, just email me and I'm happy to send it as an attachment. I'm sorry if it didn't download. I am a bit of a Luddite when it comes to this. So any more questions, just plug them into the open questions on Q&A. So we're dropping. That's good. There's less of you. I should tell you we had 200 people who signed up, and only 75 of you showed up. Okay. Seriously, anybody has any more questions, feel free to call me directly. Use the cell phone number 516-459-0436. Someone has raised their hand, but I'm afraid I don't know how to answer the question. So whoever it is, please simply write your question on the Q&A and I'll try to answer it. Oh, now I see a million questions, but I can't find them. No, there is no minimum spend for an update state shoot as far as I know. I'm happy to answer that privately if you'd like. What is the typical amount of equity needed to get a film started? It's impossible to say. I have a picture that's budgeted at $120 million. I had another one that was budgeted at $3 million. I mean, I've done them at 300,000. I did one many years ago for 965,000. There's no minimum amount. It's really a function of what you need. If you have a lot of special effects or a lot of locations, your picture is going to cost more than one that gets shot in one location. It's just very difficult. Do I advise making an offer to a bankable actor before you have total financing? That's hard, and you know it's hard, TJ. It doesn't mean anything to make an offer to an actor unless you have the money, because unless you can make that offer to the actor without going through the agent. The agent only gets paid if there's money. If there's no money attached, you can't attract the agent's attention. So making an offer to somebody who doesn't have the ability to actually pay is very, very difficult. Having a discussion with an actor beforehand, saying that actor is interested is fine, but you're not going to be able to make an offer to that actor that has any meaning until you know when you're going to shoot. And you're not going to know when you're going to shoot until you raise the money. And the actor at that time, when you finally raise the money, may not be available. So this becomes very, very difficult. Do I advise against first-time producers being actors as well? Yes, I advise against that. Because if you're going to be an actor, you have to, and you're going to be a good actor, you have to concentrate on being the actor. If you're going to be a producer, you have to concentrate on being the producer. It's hard to do both. It's not to say it can't be done, but if you're serious about being an actor, be an actor. If you're serious about being a producer, be a producer. It's hard to do both. Can I say anything about the differences of in-kind investors and equity investors? Well, sure. In-kind investors. I'm not so sure that in my experience I've ever been involved with an in-kind investor. I've seen sponsorship deals where an alcoholic beverage company will pay $25,000 for someone to drink their booze on the screen because it's kind of a form of promotion. But excuse me, but they typically don't secure a share of the equity. Instead, they pay money that reduces the cost of the picture by whatever it is they pay, and they get a promotion in exchange. The hard part about valuing with taking an in-kind investor is valuing that investor's contribution, because unless it's significant and has the same value, it's very, very hard to determine. What is a typical percentage return to a P&A investor? Well, a P&A investor is going to get their money back in first position before the net profit participant. They're going to get a share of net profits, which is going to, the overall P&A investor is going to share of net profits, which is significantly less than what the equity investors get and the profit participants get. It is highly negotiable. Okay. What is the typical return on investment that bond or equity investors are looking for when investing? Well, in my opinion, equity investors are looking to help a friend. It's very hard for them to be in a position to actually expect, or you to be in a position where you can provide a statement of what their return on equity will be. A lender will look for a very, very high rate of return, and they will, on one private lender I'm aware of, if you were to borrow 50% of the production cost of the picture, they would want to receive a share of equity equal to what an equity investor would receive divided by 2. So if you put up 100% of the picture and you get 50% of the equity, if you put up 50% of the equity and you get 25% of the equity, that would be one calculation. But if you lend 50% of the equity, this guy would look for somewhere between 10 and 12% of the profit in exchange for his loan. That would come out of the equity side, not necessarily the other. What do I charge as a lawyer? As much as I can get. Flat fee, hourly, percentage of budget? Yes to all of that. Do I adjust rates if low budget film or emerging talent? Yes. Will your firm do all production legal or just setting up initial above the line and distribution deals? We will do it all. Can we make an offer for A-list actor with a financing letter of commitment for pre-casting? Or do we need proof of funds money only? Well, the answer is yes. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't mean it's going to work. And a cast member is not going to commit to you for a date certain unless you put money in. We can talk about that in another seminar, but what I'm suggesting is that if you want to hold, we're in May, let's say we're in June. If you expect to start your production in January of next year and you have the actor involved and you know you're going to pay that actor $1.5 million, the agent's going to say to you, and they're going to pay them for an 8-week shoot, $1.5 million commencing on January 5, 2021. That agent's going to say to you, if you want to hold those dates, you got to put $150,000 in escrow now. And so that money will stay there. And regardless of whether your picture goes, that money goes to the talent. It would go to the talent when you either go forward with the picture or abandon the picture, because that block of time has been locked off by the investor. And so therefore there's a value to that. That's kind of what is important. So securing that talent, you need to have your dates. If you don't have your dates, they're not going to commit to you. Okay, I don't think there are any more questions. Okay. What's the minimum budget needed for a completion bond? I would recommend that um, you not look for a bond for a picture under $2 million. Um, with a 10% contingency and a 3% fee, that eats up way too much of your budget on a relatively low budget picture. What's my short thoughts on shooting a pilot and selling it? Well, if it's a pilot for a TV series, it's a great way to go. The challenge with shooting a pilot for a TV series is that typically the network is going to own it. And that's the challenge. What's the typical percentage return to a P&A investor? I think I answered that. Usually they get the same kind of 120%. Excuse me, I'm helping myself. Okay, well, it looks like that's it. Seriously, if there are any more questions, please type them in right away. And I will try to answer them. And by the way, I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants to make a movie at any time for a couple of phone calls, no charge. I think making movies is the hardest thing to do on the planet. So that's kind of what I think. And I admire you for trying to do so. Okay, and if someone wants to schedule a call or anything like that, shoot me an email again. You should have gotten my email from the invitations and the confirmation and whatnot. So I'm going to call it a day now, and thank you all for attending. Please let me know if you'd like to hear another kind of presentation on another topic, and I'll think about whether or not it's a good idea to do. Okay. I kind of want to make sure I answer everybody's questions. Okay. Have a good afternoon, everyone. And send me your comments. Bye-bye.